Have you ever wondered what really holds a society together? I mean, when you look at a stable, harmonious nation, it almost looks easy. But underneath it all, there's a really complex blueprint at work. Today, we're going to explore that blueprint by looking at the two fundamental pillars that are absolutely essential for keeping everything in balance. So I want you to picture society as this massive bridge. It connects all of us. It allows us to move forward, to progress. But what stops it from collapsing when things get stormy? Well, it all comes down to two critical supports. One pillar built from the bottom up by its citizens, and another managed from the top down by its government. Let's start by digging into the foundation of that very first pillar. All right, let's talk about Pillar 1, citizen identity. The big idea here is that a strong nation isn't just something built by leaders or institutions. Nope, it's really forged by its people, by everyday citizens who feel a real, genuine connection to their country. And that leads us to a really crucial question, one that gets right to the heart of this pillar. Why is having a strong sense of national identity so important, especially for young people today? Well, the source material gives us two pretty powerful reasons. First up, a strong identity is basically the engine that drives civic participation. Think about it. When young people feel like they're truly a part of their country, they don't just sit on the sidelines. They start paying attention, they get interested in what's happening, and they get involved. That sense of belonging is what turns a passive observer into an engaged citizen who actually wants to contribute. The second reason is just as important, and it's all about resilience. You know, in our crazy connected world, we are constantly bombarded with all sorts of external ideas and influences online. A strong national identity works like an anchor, like a social defense mechanism. Without it, people can sometimes drift toward values that really clash with social harmony, which can lead to some serious problems like self-radicalization. So that firm sense of identity, it protects both the individual and the nation. Okay, so we have our first pillar, strong, engaged citizens. That's the foundation. Now let's move to the second pillar, which is all about the top-down component. Let's talk about the government's dilemma. And it really is a dilemma. It's about the incredibly tough job of governing fairly when you're dealing with all sorts of competing needs. This image of the scales, it really gets to the core of the problem. With only so many resources to go around, governments are in this constant balancing act. On one side of the scale, you have all the different priorities of your citizens. And on the other side? Well, that's the tough reality that any big decision means an unequal sharing of costs, where some groups will always end up carrying a heavier burden than others. So that's the theory. But how does this balancing act actually play out in the real world? Let's dive into two case studies that show just how challenging this can be. First, we've got the challenge of managing differing priorities. The Dover forest debate is a perfect example. On one hand, you have nature lovers fighting to protect a really precious green space. Makes sense. But on the other hand, the government sees that same piece of land as a place to build much-needed homes for young families. Both are totally valid, crucial priorities, but with limited land, you can't have both, and choosing one is guaranteed to upset the other. Now let's look at that other challenge, the unequal sharing of costs. Building dormitories for migrant workers is something that benefits the entire country, right? It supports the whole economy. But when those dorms have to be built near existing residential areas, the people who live right there feel like they're unfairly taking on all the burden, the noise, the crowding. This creates this really intense local pushback that makes it incredibly difficult to implement policies that are important for the nation as a whole. And this table here, it breaks down the two challenges beautifully. The Dover forest conflict is a what problem. What should we do with this resource? It puts entire groups like nature lovers and young families against each other and risks a widespread loss of trust in the government. The dormitory issue, though, that's a where problem. Where do we put this necessary burden? It affects a much smaller, localized group, but it can spark incredibly intense, focused opposition. Both, in their own way, are a serious threat to social harmony. So we've got our two pillars, an engaged citizenry on one side and a government trying to navigate the tough job of governing fairly on the other. And this, of course, brings us right back to where we started, the bridge. And here we are, back at the bridge. Because a harmonious society isn't just about what the government does, and it's not just about how citizens feel. It's about both. The two pillars are completely dependent on each other. You need resilient, engaged citizens who participate in society. And those citizens need a government that can skillfully navigate all of society's competing needs. A government can't make tough choices without the trust of its people. The bridge simply needs both to stand strong. And that brings me to my last question for you. If you were the architect in charge of this bridge, this delicate partnership between the people and the state, where would you start working? Which connection point would you choose to strengthen first? It's a tough one to think about. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.